Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Livingston. I thought I knew what I was going to talk about this week. I had been planning to continue our conversation about the mind-body connection through fascia and some of the places where science and spirituality meet. I love those conversations, and we will absolutely keep having them. But then I had a few discovery calls and some new patient visits and some follow-up appointments. And by the end of the week, I couldn't stop thinking about the same conversation that I've been having with women for years. And I felt like it was the time to record this episode. So if someone is considering becoming a patient in my practice, I've always offered what I call discovery calls. Essentially, it's time for me to establish a trusting therapeutic relationship with you and to hear your story. It doesn't start with me diagnosing something. It doesn't start with a perfectly organized medical history. I usually say to patients, I'd love to hear your story, your reasons for reaching out, and what your health goals are. And then I just kind of let them go and start telling me. And very often it starts with a woman trying to describe something that she can feel, but she hasn't been able to explain or fully articulate. Almost every single call that I had this week started with some version of, Dr. Kelly, I just don't feel like myself anymore. And I'm sure if you're listening, many of you are nodding along with that phrase. If you've ever said those words, even though you might not be able to articulate what I don't feel like myself anymore means exactly, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. You may still be functioning. You're going to work and caring for your family or running a business. You're making everyone dinner. Maybe you're still exercising, answering emails, getting people where they need to go, and holding everything together. And from the outside, your life might look fine. People might have no idea that you don't feel like yourself anymore. But inside, something feels very different. Maybe you don't recover the way you used to when you get sick, or your stress tolerance, your window of tolerance or threshold feels lower. Your mood might be a lot more unstable than it's ever been. Your energy is not what it used to be, or things that used to require little effort really feel unmanageable now. So maybe you're still doing all of the things, but you know that it doesn't feel the same. You don't feel like the person you used to feel like. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I heard it so many times. I've heard it so many times throughout the years, but this week it just kept coming up over and over again. And it was like the universe saying, okay, you've got to record an episode specifically about this thing that every woman is saying when they call. And I've been seeing patients for about 15 years. I started seeing patients in clinic in 2011, and I founded Roots Deep Medicine in 2013. And I was hearing this back then, but I'm still hearing it now. And these women are saying something is off. And when they're going to their primary or their OBGYN, they're being told, well, everything looks normal. Your labs are fine. And I want to talk about the space between their experience and the care that they're receiving and the hole that that leaves, where women are essentially not being cared for, not being heard, and not finding the root cause of why they don't feel like themselves anymore. Because in that space is where so many women start to lose trust in themselves, and they start to lose faith in the healthcare system. I recently had a discovery call with a woman who had started hormone replacement therapy or menopausal hormone therapy because she was having hot flashes and night sweats. And the hormone therapy helped for about a year, and the hot flashes improved, the night sweats improved, and she felt like maybe she was getting somewhere. Then depression came back, hot flashes came back, night sweats were worse. And when she called me, she said she actually felt worse than when she had gone on the hormones initially. Now, I'm not saying that that was the wrong choice for her, but there are a lot of layers here. So she had asked the provider managing her hormones whether they were monitoring labs. And she was told, oh, we don't care about the labs. We're just treating your symptoms. So we're going to increase your dose. So then she went to her primary care physician and they did order labs, and she was told your labs are normal. And I remember sitting there with her and saying, okay, but what labs were run? And that question is so very important, because when a woman comes in and she's depressed in midlife or exhausted, inflamed, anxious, not sleeping, waking at 3 a.m., losing hair, gaining weight, or feeling like she's not herself anymore, and then she's told your labs are normal, this is not a full explanation for what's going on, especially if only a CBC and a metabolic panel and maybe a cholesterol panel and vitamin D were run. This is by no means enough to look into when a woman is saying year after year, I don't feel like myself anymore. So, yes, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, were iron stores checked? Was ferritin actually run? Or was someone only looking for frank anemia showing up on a CBC? Was a full thyroid panel run, including, not limited to TSH, but including free T3 and free T4 and thyroid antibodies and maybe reverse T3? Were inflammatory markers looked at for this patient, or omega-3 status? How about B12, magnesium, neurotransmitters? Was anyone asking questions about digestion and absorption? Was she getting enough protein in her diet? Is she constipated? Is she bloated? How's her microbiome? How's her gut-brain axis? Was anyone asking about stress physiology or her HPA axis? Cortisol patterns, blood sugar. Blood sugar is so huge for women in midlife. How many years has this woman been pushing through not feeling like herself anymore and being told, here's a pill or your labs are normal? Because if you've been listening for, I think we're at about 70 episodes now, which is so fun. But if you've been listening along, you know depression is not just depression, right? Anxiety is not just, oh, you're anxious, here's a medication. Fatigue is not just, I'm tired because I'm getting older. And I don't say that to dismiss the reality of depression or anxiety. I've done entire episodes on depression, neuroinflammation, SSRIs, the gut-brain axis, hormones, and mood. And yes, medication can be necessary sometimes. It can be life-saving. This is not a conversation about shaming medicine or telling people not to use conventional care. And I definitely hear from conventional doctors who are friends of mine that they don't have enough time to spend with patients, nor are they trained in this. So there's really a gap in the care that women are receiving. And if we just set our egos aside and we really start listening to women and looking for answers to the questions they're asking when they say, I don't feel like myself anymore, I think we could solve a lot of the healthcare issues that women are facing today. So this is a conversation about what gets missed when we stop at the symptom or we stop at the few labs that insurance is most likely to cover, because women know when something else is going on. They might not know the exact physiology or biochemistry or the lab marker to ask for. They might not know that their issue is iron or thyroid or chronic inflammation or hormone fluctuations or blood sugar or histamine or gut health or trauma physiology or perimenopause or, what's actually probably true, all of these things tangled together, but they do know that something has changed and they do not feel like themselves. And when you keep being told nothing is wrong, eventually you stop asking what is happening in my body and you stop getting curious and you start asking, can I even trust myself? Maybe they're right, there is nothing wrong. And the saddest part is that sometimes women start to feel like they're losing their minds. And this is the part that gets me the most fired up. Not just the fatigue or the hot flashes or the abnormal labs or the loss of trust in self, but the moment that a woman starts doubting that she knows her own body because nobody has helped her understand it. That is such a big mission and passion of mine. I say to patients all the time, my goal is not for you to need me. My goal is to teach you how to understand your labs, your patterns, your body, and what to do every day to achieve optimal health and prevent disease, to feel like yourself again, ideally better. One of the women I spoke with on a discovery call this week had been exhausted for 7 years. 7 years she's been exhausted looking for answers. Think about how much life happens in 7 years. 7 years ago, my daughter was 4, and I was just moving out of the house that I had shared with her dad. I was embarking on a whole new life for myself. That feels like a very long time ago. Now, there are a lot of things that I've worked through in those 7 years, but thankfully, I haven't just been having that same symptom of fatigue over and over again, looking for answers and never finding them. Think about how many mornings you wake up tired in 7 years. Or how many times you might tell yourself, I just need to get through this day, or I need to get through winter, I'll feel better in summer. How many appointments she's made. She's seen so many different specialists over those years. They had run labs, they'd run the labs that they knew to run. And she'd had to explain herself so many times over and over to this new specialist and then that therapist, and just constantly wondering, am I ever going to feel like myself again? And she'd been told it's stress, it's aging. She was told it's motherhood, it's perimenopause, it might be depression, it might be nothing at all. And eventually her primary circled back and ran an ANA, or an anti-nuclear antibody. I had a call with a new patient of mine whose labs had come back with a positive ANA right after I had that discovery call. So let me rewind and explain what that is. An ANA is an anti-nuclear antibody. So this patient who was tired for 7 years, finally her primary ran that, and she had very high titers, which means that essentially you've heard me talk about autoimmune like a bonfire before. It's the sign that the autoimmune bonfire is starting, and if not started already. And very often that chronic fatigue is related to that process. And if we'd run an ANA sooner, an anti-nuclear antibody sooner, we might know there's autoimmune disease smoldering here before it becomes a fire. So then I got on a call with a patient whose ANA I had run, a new patient, and she said, what is this? Why has this never been run before? And why are my EBV, Epstein-Barr virus antibodies high? And then I got into my whole spiel around autoimmune disease and chronic fatigue, and it's linked to Epstein-Barr virus, which I have a whole episode on. And if these questions were asked sooner, these women could go back to feeling like themselves, if not better, have their energy back, have some answers, and be preventing an autoimmune disease for those whole 7 years versus being told everything's normal, here's a hormone, or here's an antidepressant. Because once her primary saw that ANA, then she was referred to a rheumatologist because now there was something measurable. There was something on paper that made people pay attention. And of course, autoimmune screening is extremely important, and ANA matters in context. I'm not saying that that's an immediate diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, but it's why I screen for autoimmune patterns in my practice, especially when I hear chronic fatigue, joint pain, brain fog, inflammatory symptoms, a family history, or a story that suggests that the immune system might be part of their picture. But what stayed with me after that call and what prompted me to write this episode was not just that her ANA was positive, I see that all the time, but it was that her body had been telling this story for years. Her body was talking to her for years and nothing was helping. And the lab did not start the story. That final positive ANA was not the beginning of the story. The lab now gives us some language to a story that had been unfolding underneath. And this is where I think we need to have such a bigger conversation about health and about prevention. Because yes, disease matters, diagnoses matter. I run a differential diagnosis in every patient. I'm a licensed physician. I run labs. Pathology matters. All of that is extremely important in how I practice. I do want to know if someone comes in with an underfunctioning thyroid that's making them tired, is it Hashimoto's autoimmune or not? Is it a nutrient deficiency like ferritin leading to low thyroid production? I do want to know if someone has an quote unquote autoimmune disease. I do want want to know if their blood sugar levels and insulin numbers are moving more toward diabetes. I absolutely am going to investigate inflammatory markers. I'm going to track things like HSCRP and homocysteine. I of course, want to know if something requires urgent medical attention or a referral to a specialist. But I've also seen that so many women who don't have a clear diagnosis still don't feel well. So, number one, labs matter, but the right labs need to be run. And number two, even if things don't come up on your labs, we don't stop asking questions. Because if we don't feel well, if we don't feel vital and optimal, that is important information. Health is not just the absence of disease. I'm not in sick care or disease management. I'm in health care. And I know that phrase gets used often in holistic medicine, but I believe it more deeply the longer I practice and hear these stories from women. Because what women are describing when they say, I don't feel like myself anymore, is not one isolated symptom. It's not one lab that we're then going to replaced with a nutrient and everything's going to be fixed. Of course, if it is iron deficiency that's in the form of low ferritin, then yes, that's one thing that we're going to work on, but we're going to ask why that's happening. It's not one isolated symptom. They're describing a whole entire loss of vitality. And vitality is such a wonderful word. The Vital Spirit podcast and Vital Spirit method, I chose that word for a reason because it's hard to measure and because it is linked to that vis, that oomph that patients very often are describing they don't have anymore. There's no standard lab marker for vitality, though, right? There's no Quest panel that tells me whether you feel connected to your life and you feel that oomph and get up and go every morning. There's no single biomarker for joy or spark or creative drive or meaning or desire or resilience or adaptability, or whether you wake up in the morning feeling like you actually want to participate in your day. Now, of course, I'm working on terrain medicine. And so I'm putting together lots of different pieces and symptoms and labs and stories from patients and things I'm observing. And sure, I might say, well, if we look at pregnenolone and DHEA and cortisol, it tells me about your HPA axis reserves or your stress physiology. It gives me clues about how much chronic stress or trauma has been in your life, but I don't stop there. And so many women know when that vitality is gone or when they can't find that joy or that spark. And it is so discouraging to them, especially if it's been going on for 7 years, when they're just told your labs are normal, here's a pill. Some of the things I heard from women this week were, I can get through the day, but I don't feel like I'm really living. I used to have so much energy, and overnight my energy declined, which that's a little bit of an alarm bell for me that there might be an infectious component in that case versus my energy started declining gradually over years. I heard I feel flat every day. I heard I look in the mirror and I don't recognize who I've become. I heard I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing and I still feel awful. And those sentences carry a lot of clinical information when we start to unpack them. They tell me something about the lived experience of the person who's sitting in front of me. These women mean it when they say they don't feel like themselves anymore. Again, even though maybe it's not measurable in a lab that's been run yet. They're telling me that something in their system has changed enough that they can feel it every day, even if no one has explained it to them yet. And over the years, I've watched so many women slowly adapt to feeling unwell, just like people will think it's normal to poop once a week. And when they come in and we start talking about the gut brain axis and I explain, no, we need to have daily bowel movements and why that's so important, but they're just used to pooping once a week. It's just how it's been for them. And they're compensating. So maybe women have built routines around the compensations. So reaching for more coffee, for example, when their body's really tired, or they're reaching for more alcohol to calm their system down and relax. They have less trust that their body will show up in a reliable way like it used to for them. And eventually the abnormal starts to feel like the new normal because their body and mind are so good at adapting. We really are good at adapting and pushing through and kind of surviving, but that by no means is the thriving vitality that I hope for my patients. And that's one of the reasons that I love discovery calls, because I get to hear the story before it becomes just a diagnosis. I get to really hear from that patient about what it feels like to be them now. I get to ask them, how do you visualize your life and your health in 5 years and 10 years? And I get to ask, what are your health goals? What are your values? Are you looking to feel like yourself again so that you can get on the floor and play with your grandkids, so that you can have vitality through your 80s and 90s, ideally? What are we working toward? And then as we start to unpack labs and understand patterns, it gives us so much more motivation to make the changes that we need to make. One of the first things I start to ask on these calls are, when did things start to change for you? What else was happening at that time? What came first? I really do want to know kind of the order that symptoms developed. What came next? And then I'm always trying to figure out, what is the body trying to solve for? What is the body trying to balance out or get back to homeostasis through? So adaptations are really intelligent in our body, but yes, they can become exhausting over time if we haven't been listening to what our body's been telling us. These stories and unpacking these stories with women are what fascinate me most about my career. Long before I became a physician, I was always fascinated by people. I've always been someone who loves to study people. And I studied psychology before naturopathic medicine, and I've always been a pattern observer. I kind of see that my brain's a little different, and I see things in patterns. I really enjoyed living in New York City during my undergraduate years because I could just people watch. I could watch how people moved, how they interacted, how they carried their stress, how they walked, what their facial expressions said. It was before iPhones and social media. So for me, studying humans was really one of the things that I love to do in my spare time. And I would always notice some people have that spark, right? They have that vitality, and some others seemed really depleted. And I would always wonder, what is their story? And that part of me is still really alive in my clinical work. And it's one of the things that lights up when I get on these discovery calls. So I'm not just listening for symptoms. I'm listening for timing, for sequence, for relationship between systems, and the moment that their story changes. So very often, the most important first clue is not the first thing that a woman says on that call. Very often, it's the things she mentions right before we get off the call, almost in passing, like, maybe she called for exhaustion and fatigue, and we talk for a while. And then as an aside, she says, "Oh yeah, and my periods have gotten really heavy over the years. They're super clotty and I'm way more uncomfortable during my period." And now I'm listening to a different pattern. And then a few minutes later, she says, "Yeah, and my hair does seem thinner. My hairbrush is a lot more full of hair than it ever used to be. And my husband's finding my hair everywhere," he says. And again, I'm listening to a different pattern and wondering, okay, how are these all connected? And then maybe she says that she stopped exercising because workouts that used to feel really energizing and good for her now wipe her out for days. At that point, my curiosity has moved toward iron. So, of course, I'm going to run a full iron panel already. I know that. However, when I hear those all in a row, I'm not just diagnosing low ferritin. Fatigue automatically means low ferritin. I'm hearing, oh, heavy periods. Well, heavy periods can create lower ferritin, and low ferritin can create heavy periods. And that hair loss might be a sign of that low ferritin, which also might be contributing to a lower functioning thyroid, because I've heard those all before in a pattern constellation. I've heard these grouped together from women before, and then I've run the labs and confirmed that. So I've seen women spend years believing they were lazy or depressed or burned out or just getting older or somehow failing at life when their reserves had been quietly declining over years. Ferritin is one of those markers that I care deeply about in women's health because it's like your pantry, so for energy. So I usually describe ferritin as the pantry form of iron. What does that mean? Okay, so I'm going to go off on a quick tangent, but you can think about the total iron that's in your blood, that maybe you've looked at your total iron or you've looked at your complete blood count and you've seen your red blood cells and your hemoglobin and hematocrit are all normal. Well, imagine that as you've got a bunch of people over your house and you're making them food. So the total iron is the food on the plate of the people that you have at your house. They're eating the food. Now you've also got food in the kitchen, you've got food in your fridge, and then you've got a backup pantry of food just in case you ran out. Now, imagine those people stay for days and days. You get snowed in for some reason. They can't leave. And you've got to keep feeding them. Well, they might not realize that you've been pulling ferritin from your storage. So again, ferritin is your storage protein of iron. And you've been pulling iron out of your pantry, but they have no idea because everything still looks normal. So for many years, you can be depleting that storage form of iron. And this happens especially with women because we cycle, we get our periods, we lose blood, right? And maybe we also have some dysbiosis or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and now we're not absorbing our iron, or we don't eat enough iron. There's so many reasons why this can happen. And now we're chronically tired, but nobody has run that lab marker. Nobody has looked in the pantry. So sure, you've got enough food in the kitchen to go through the day, and those people at your table were happy for a while, but slowly everyone in the household is going to start to get hungry when you run out of food. Iron is not just about whether or not you're anemic. It's involved in oxygen delivery, mitochondrial energy production, exercise tolerance, thyroid physiology, neurotransmitter production, hair growth, cognition, and overall resilience. So if a woman has heavy periods, fatigue, hair thinning, dizziness, brain fog, shortness of breath when they're exercising, poor exercise recovery, anxiety or panic, or she feels like she's dragging herself through the day, I want to know, did anybody look in your pantry? Has anyone looked at ferritin, not just hemoglobin? And I want to know the trend. Is this something that's been falling for years? Was it low when you were pregnant? A lot of women have heard, oh, your ferritin's low when they're pregnant, but then nobody looks into it later on. Has it ever been optimal? Did it improve with oral supplementation? Did it fail to improve despite oral supplementation? Because that brings me back to that next question. Why? Why are iron stores low? So now you have a woman who's been tired for 7 years and no one has looked at her pantry. To me, that seems like a mistake, essentially, because that woman could have been feeling a lot more vital that entire time. Whether it's related to an anti-nuclear antibody or autoimmune, knowing our labs and knowing our patterns is so key. And unfortunately, as women, we have to learn how to advocate for ourselves. Start to think to yourself, are you losing iron through heavy menstrual bleeding and heavy periods? Are you not getting enough through your food? Are you not absorbing it? Is there inflammation affecting iron regulation? Are there digestive issues? Have you been taking acid suppressing medication that prevents absorption? Is constipation part of your story? Is SIBO part of the story? Is the gut-brain axis a driver of all of this? So now what looked like fatigue became a story about iron. And the iron story becomes a digestion story. So now we're talking about stress physiology and blood sugar and inflammation and hormones and sleep and how the body's been adapting for years, because these are the patterns that I care about. Because your body does not experience systems in isolation. It's not just one thing. Remember, our body is always communicating, and there are so many different systems that are connected and that are creating our vitality. So you know, if you've been listening, your hormones are not separate from your digestion. And your digestion is inextricably linked to your nervous system health. And your nervous system is going to create the health of your immune system. Your immune system is going to be impacted by your sleep. Your sleep is going to be impacted by your blood sugar dysregulation or regulation. Your blood sugar is going to impact your mood. So none of these are separate conversations. They're one conversation that maybe is happening through different patterns and different languages and different things that might show up in labs or different experiences that a patient might have when she first calls me on that discovery call. And so inevitably, by the end of that call, women are usually saying to me, oh, thank you. I feel heard. I feel like this is starting to make sense. And I can usually hear one or two sentences, and I'm at this point, again, not just reducing things to a sentence or a symptom, but I can usually tell what direction we're going to go and kind of predict some of the other symptoms that might come along with that pattern. And that moment is so powerful for a woman to be heard and have the pieces connected and have it essentially fed back to her in a story that starts to make sense. This can shift everything in their health awakening journey. When a woman realizes she's not crazy, she's not lazy, she's not making it up, there's a pattern, there's a context, and there's a physiological reason why. And that's why I do start with the physical before I have any deeper conversations about spirit, about mind, about emotions. All of those, yes, are going to play a role in how we feel and in our health and in our health journey. But when there's a pattern and we can look at it in context, and there's a reason that our body might be responding the way it is, that moment alone can change everything for a woman. And so if you don't have someone you're working with in that way, I highly recommend you start to advocate for yourself. Ask for labs, or now, as I'm going to get into in a minute, you can run so many labs on your own. I've offered a lab shop on Rupa. I offer labs a la carte on Fullscript. Now, some of these labs are $3, $4, $5. It's not like you're going to break the bank by finding out some of these pieces of information. So, number one, just knowing that information is out there. And number two, knowing where to find it is so important. Because now we're not fighting the body. We're listening to it. We're listening to the clues. And that's why I talk so much about homeopathy and the principles of naturopathic medicine on this podcast, because one of the most important principles is that we treat the person who has the disease, not the disease the person has. And that might sound like a really small distinction, but it really changes so much in how we care for ourselves. Two women can have that same diagnosis of low ferritin and completely different stories and completely different ways that they got there. One woman with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, for example, might have years of postpartum depletion, low ferritin, trauma physiology, insomnia, gluten sensitivity, and a family history of autoimmunity. And the next woman with Hashimoto's has a completely different pattern involving gut infections, chronic dysbiosis and stress, environmental chemical exposures, blood sugar instability, and low vitamin D. But they both have thyroid antibodies. The diagnosis matters, but it doesn't tell me who that person is. It doesn't tell me how to get her back to health and wholeness. And it doesn't tell me how the pattern emerged. And in root cause medicine, we're looking for causes of those patterns. It doesn't tell me what her body's been adapting to. It doesn't tell me what I need to do first. And that's why diagnosis can be helpful, but it's still not the whole story. The story is always so much bigger. And that's a lot to hold in one place sometimes for women. And so creating the container of the Vital Spirit method and being really methodical with how we walk through care and how we look at labs and how we look at patterns has been so helpful to so many women. We provide that container of safety. And it's why I've become so passionate about lab education. Over the years, so many women would come into my practice, also sometimes having years and years of lab work. Maybe they've got a shopping bag of supplements and they've got a binder of lab work. And that spanned over 7 years for this woman, for example, but the right labs weren't run. They've got a whole binder and none of that binder is really moving the needle in how they feel. And sometimes they have gone to more functional doctors nowadays. And somehow with all of that data, still they feel like no one really helped them understand what they were looking at. So I'll also hear, I've spent thousands of dollars on specialists and specialty labs, and I still don't know how the pieces fit together or the order of operations. So over the last 15 years of seeing patients, this is what I've found myself doing over and over again in practice. And if you're new to this, I want you to know that there are answers, and every single piece of the puzzle that you've gathered on your journey is not a waste. I always say to patients, even if you've got a bag of supplements that haven't helped you or a binder of labs that haven't answered the questions fully for you yet, it's like putting all the pieces of the puzzle together and eventually they will click into place. So a lot of what I do is not just reviewing labs, but it's translating and it's connecting the dots and putting those pieces together for women. So I did want some of the goal of this episode to be for you to understand why I put together my lab interpretation resources. So I understand that not everyone will be able to work with me Or maybe you have a physician who's willing to run labs for you. Great. I have a lab interpretation guide. And if you've listened to episode 11, part 1 and 2, you can go back to that and you can work through each lab that I went through in that episode. That episode was maybe a little boring if you just listened to it by itself. But now that I've had so many other episodes, I think you can see in context why those episodes were the most comprehensive ones I have about foundational labs and functional labs. And you can take those episodes and work through them and run those labs either on your own or with a physician willing to order them for you. That is the beauty of, I think, the advancements in the internet and even AI. I think we can't get rid of it at this point. So you certainly could even run some of those labs and you could feed it to ChatGPT and start to gather information. I'm not saying to do it irresponsibly or do everything on your own, but there's a lot out there now where you can start to put the puzzle pieces together and then find the right fit, find the right practitioner for you who can really help you in sequence and in the order of operations, essentially what to do first. Those episodes specifically walk through many of the markers I find myself reviewing every single week in practice with patients, including ferritin, thyroid markers, inflammatory markers, hormone panels, stress physiology markers, nutrient status, and how we essentially assess the terrain or health of the body as a whole. They're not meant to turn you into your own doctor. Again, they're just meant to help you ask better questions and advocate for yourself. Because once you start understanding the language of your body, your questions change. Now you're not just saying, is this normal? Can I ever feel like myself again? But you're asking, how does this fit into a larger story? And what is step 1 in getting back my vitality? One of the most exciting things I think in medicine right now is that for a long time, many of these labs were really hard to obtain unless you were working directly with a practitioner. I think a lot of women still think they have to get their primary to run these labs through insurance. You don't. First, yes, for some of them, like an ANA, for example, you might want the guidance of a doctor who can actually interpret that for you. But for some of the simple labs like ferritin and vitamin D and B12 and inflammatory markers, just start gathering the information. You might be really surprised at where those patterns are pointing you, and some of the things that you've never even considered might be draining your system. And for many women, if cost was a barrier or insurance coverage was a barrier, cost is so much lower now. It's dramatically lower than what it used to cost to run those tests when you had to run them through a physician. So I think this is really important because one of the most frustrating things that I hear every day is, I was told everything was normal. And some of the most important questions were never asked. So how can we know if everything is normal if we never actually looked at everything? How can we say nothing is contributing to 7 years of fatigue if we haven't asked the right questions, if we haven't run that ANA or that ferritin or that full thyroid panel? Women deserve access to this information. This is why I created the podcast. I do link episodes in patients' plans so that they can unpack and understand things like an Epstein-Barr virus panel, things like low ferritin, things like what is the gut-brain axis. But also my goal was so that this information could spread to women who are just being told everything's fine when they don't feel like themselves anymore. Women really deserve to participate in their own healthcare. And because so many women now are reaching out from states where I don't practice or from places where they can't become a patient, I am also creating a Know Your Numbers educational series and masterclass. So this is for women who want to understand their health more deeply, even if they're not working with me one-on-one. It's not going to be about memorizing reference ranges or obsessing over lab values, but it is going to be about learning the skill underneath what I do every day in pattern recognition. I will be teaching you how to ask better questions of your provider and how to understand why one symptom might lead us towards something that seems unrelated at first, but that could be foundational to your healing process. We'll talk about how to connect physiology to symptoms, to medical history, to timing, and to the lived experience that you have in your body. Because the goal is not just to know your numbers on a lab paper. The goal is to understand the pattern that those numbers reveal. The numbers are data, and the pattern is where the story lives, and the pattern is where prevention lives. Because if you know your patterns, you can prevent disease. A few weeks ago, I was picking up my daughter from a play date, and I ended up chatting with the grandmother who had spent decades working in nursing. She had worked in trauma in the ICU, and she had cared for people in some of the most intense and vulnerable moments of their lives. And somehow we ended up talking about healthcare and women's health and prevention and what's missing in medicine today. It was such a wonderful conversation. I ended up staying for another hour at the play date with my daughter and just chatting with this woman. And I loved every minute of it. And she told me if she were starting over today, she would focus on teaching women how to care for themselves before they reached a health crisis. As I was walking out the door, she said, keep doing what you're doing. Women need to learn to advocate for themselves. And I was lit up by that. I just loved hearing that, not because women are struggling and need to advocate for themselves, but because that language is getting out there more and more. Women are realizing I do need to learn about my body. And now that we have access to things like labs and ideally someone who can teach you patterns, that advocating can become a little bit easier. And you're not going to feel like you're going crazy or like everything's normal or like there's just a pill that you're going to be handed. And I've just been replaying that conversation in my mind so many times because, yes, women need to know how to advocate for themselves, not out of fear or hypervigilance, but through relationship with their body, through connection, through understanding physiology. Because nobody lives inside of your body except you. If you don't feel like yourself anymore, and especially if that's been going on for a long time, that's really important. These observations are key. Your questions matter. Your experience living in your body is the most important piece of data, even outside of all these labs. You're allowed to ask for copies of your labs, get the data from your physicians. You're allowed to track results over time on your own. And you're absolutely allowed to seek another opinion if you keep being told over and over, your labs are normal, or we don't run those labs because they don't matter. You're allowed to keep asking questions when it doesn't make sense. And if you don't feel like yourself and you're told that's normal, I want you to hear me clearly. It does not mean you're broken. It does not mean you're going crazy. You're not imagining things. It also doesn't mean you need to panic. It doesn't mean you have an autoimmune disease, but it means there's more to understand. So start there. Become curious about what is going on in your body and ask for copies of your previous labs. And if you're so inclined, find a healthcare provider who can start to connect the dots for you. So if this episode resonated with you, please go back and listen to episode 11, part 1 and 2 on lab interpretation. Download the free lab guide. Explore the Rupa Lab Shop if you want to start ordering some labs on your own or see some of the functional testing I recommend in practice. It's actually not as expensive as people have thought it is in their minds. So sometimes it's just about taking that first step. And if you want to start learning how to think through these patterns in a deeper way, join my email list. The link is in my bio on social media and it's on my website. So you can hear when the Know Your Numbers masterclass or series opens. And if you're listening thinking, this is me, I've been told everything is normal, but I still don't feel like myself. That's why I offer discovery calls. Sometimes people don't need another supplement or a random lab run. They just need someone to connect the dots and they need someone who can listen for patterns. So that is what I do. I help women make sense of the story their body has been trying to tell them. As always, the Vital Spirit podcast is sponsored by my clinic, Roots Deep Medicine, where I work with women using naturopathic medicine, functional lab assessment, gut-brain axis care, botanical medicine, homeopathy, nervous system regulation, and the Vital Spirit method to help restore resilience, vitality, and a deeper relationship with your body. If this episode helped you, please subscribe, share it with another woman who needs to hear it, and come find me through the link in the show notes. Until next time, remember, your body is always communicating with you. Your symptoms are information, and health is more than the absence of disease. Sometimes healing begins when someone finally helps you understand the language of your body. Have a great day.